Welcome to our Clutch Time special March Madness edition here at QTV. I'm Jeremy Culver.
And I'm Andy Martinez. With us focusing on the NCAA Division I tournament, there won't be Hawk Talk this week, but I'm sure you will all enjoy the show just the same. With the tournament field being released, there is always questions about teams that did and didn't get in. Every year, there is always a few teams that many feel should have been in the field but are not included. With that in mind, Jeremy, what team do you believe was the biggest snub?
I think the biggest snub this year has to be University of Maryland. I mean, they go in, they have two top 5 victories, both of them against Duke, when Duke was ranked second in the nation. And also keep in mind, Duke has a number 2 seed in the tournament, and they still don't get in. They're the first team to have 2 top 5 victories and not get the tournament since the 2009-2010 Connecticut team. I know that they did not play very well against the top 150. They're 3-7, but they were 18-2 against 101 and below, which a lot of teams cannot say going into this tournament.
Yeah, we look at the teams that did get in, like LaSalle and Middle Tennessee. They won the games they should have won, and that's mainly why they got in. But I look at Alabama. They were 21-12 and 12-6 in the SEC. They finished tied for second in the conference, and they're led by Trevor Relaford, who averaged 15 points a game, and Trevor Lacey, who averages 12 points a game. They beat Villanova earlier in the year, and they don't have the better record than LaSalle or Middle Tennessee, but they have the better wins, and I think that's what ultimately should have triumphed over other teams.
I think especially with Alabama, how they could have gotten in is their strength of schedule is 40. And that means there's only 39 other teams who had a harder schedule than them.
Exactly.
I mean, I know Alabama, though, they're 0-6 against the top 50, which is, you don't want that. And their worst loss is to Auburn, a 9-23 team, and the BPI, which is the Basketball Player Index, which is rated out of 100. That was a 12.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, that obviously is not going to help your chances.
I still kind of look at it, though. They did play a tough schedule, and that kind of overlays into other games. I mean, you're mentally fatigued from the last game or from the previous games. So I think that just has a carryover effect, and that affects how everything happens the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's a great thing to keep in mind when they go to select these brackets. Along with the snubs, every year there are teams that many feel took spots from the well-deserving teams. Looking at the bracket, Andy, what team do you feel was the biggest surprise in the field of 69?
Well, the team I want to look at is St. Mary's. They played in the Western Conference, and their biggest win was against Creighton, who had high expectations this year, but they kind of struggled. And they lost to Gonzaga 3 times during the season, and they lost by 17 points at home, and they lost by 14 in the conference championship. They had no other wins besides that. They lost to Pacific, who's a 15 seed in this year's tournament, who struggled mightily this season. And they lost to Georgia Tech, who wasn't anywhere near where they had been in the years past. And they also lost to Northern Iowa. They didn't have any marquee wins, and I don't see why they got in over teams like Maryland or Alabama. Yeah,
and you look at their schedule they got. You know, they come in with a strength of schedule of 110, and they got 16 of their 25 wins, if I remember correctly, from the top 151 and below. Like, that's not going to give you a thing. But I want to go with Middle Tennessee. They had an overall record of 28-5, but they were 25-2 from the 151 and up. That means only 3 wins came from teams who have an RPI, which is basically your strength of schedule also. A team of 150 and up, or below, I should say, they only have 3 wins against them. I mean, that's nothing that you can do. They led their conference, which their conference is really bad, and they go into their tournament and they get knocked out when they should have won that tournament. So they don't even get in on an automatic bid. They get in because of, which was the big factor this year, it's not who you beat, it was who did you not lose to.
And I think that really, that changed from various years, previous years past. Before, if you lost to a bad team but you beat a good team, it balanced out. This year, if you lost to a bad team and beat a good team, it didn't really matter because you had that bad loss. And that really affected what teams got in. In years past, we have witnessed magical runs made by teams like Butler, George Mason, and VCU. Every year, it seems there is potential for a little-known team to become America's sweetheart and the tournament Cinderella by making a long run in the tournament. Jeremy, who do you feel has the potential to be this year's Cinderella?
Honestly, my Cinderella was last year's Cinderella. It's VCU. You look at their strength of schedule is 76, which is not too bad considering the conference that they play in, which isn't a very, highly touted conference. But they have win over number 20 Butler, and that BPI, which is, again, out of 100, was a 99.4. It's a huge record. You can look on the screen, the points per possession, like they're ranked 19th in the nation. Turnovers, they're ranked, making their own turnovers, they're 14th in the nation, so they're very low at turning over the ball. But then you look at them turning over the other teams, they're ranked number 1 in the nation. And they're going to be going up against teams like Michigan, who has trouble handling the ball, Kansas, who has trouble handling the ball. It looks like they have the route that could help them out.
I want to take a look at a different team. They're not really a mid-major team like VCU is. They play in a major conference, but I want to look at Oregon. They got a 12 seed in this year's tournament, which I think is kind of disrespectful. They won the Pac-12 conference. They finished 3rd in the regular season. They beat UNLV, who's highly rated in this year's tournament, and then they swept UCLA, including beating them in the Pac-12 championship game. They have 4 of their starters that average at least 9 points a game, and 2 players that come off the bench that also average at least 9 points a game. They're deep, and they can make a good run in this tournament if they can play their game.
Yeah, Oregon, they are a very scary team to look at in this year because of the fact that they got very disrespected in their seeding. And as you know, in past years, when a team feels they've gotten disrespected, they play with a chip on their shoulder, and that can just carry them themselves, whether their team is good or not in the tournament, just getting that chip on your shoulder.
Another stat I want to point out is how good they are defensively. They rank 22nd in the nation in defensive efficiency, which is really big, especially coming in March. And they held their opponents to 50 or fewer points 9 times this season. They have a really great defense, and they can score in bunches.
And that's the one thing that you're really going to have to get in the NCAA tournament is scoring bunches. During many tournaments, many high-seeded teams have fallen early. For example, Missouri, as a number 2 seed, lost last year in their opening game. Keeping with the trends of surprises, Andy, what team do you feel has the biggest chance at being the bust of the tournament?
I want to look at the team that probably has the best record this year in basketball, and that's Gonzaga. They're 31-2, and that's a really good record. It looks really good. But then you look at their losses, and there's to Butler, who's been very inconsistent. They've lost some bad games, and they've won some good games. And they lost to Illinois, who started really hot, but has kind of gone down ever since their hot start. They have the team that can make a run to the national championship, but they didn't play a tough schedule. So you really can't judge where they are if you're playing the teams like Pepperdine or San Diego. So you really can't determine how deep a run they can make. They face a tough obstacle in Pitt in the possible 3rd round. So that could be a stumbling point.
I agree with you on Gonzaga because of their conference. They did have a good out-of-conference schedule, which helps them, obviously, but their conference is very weak, so their record is misleading. But I want to look at Kansas. You look at Kansas, like I said earlier, they have trouble holding on to the ball. As you can see, they're turning over the ball. They're ranked 169th in the nation. That's very bad. You want the lower number to be there. And as I pointed out earlier, with VCU being my Cinderella, they are going to end up facing Kansas. And VCU is number 1 at turning the ball over. So Kansas, they have to figure out here and now, how are they going to handle the ball? Because the teams that they got seeded with, Michigan, VCU, UCLA, they all have, turnover capabilities if they get down the line to Kansas. And if Kansas can't hold on to the ball, you ain't going to score.
Yeah, you look at Kansas, they had an easy route to win the Big 12 championship, and they stumbled. Kansas State, their in-state rival, came up and beat them. And that kind of just shows where the team is at. They had high expectations. They've not been meeting those expectations. They still have had a good season, but they've lost some bad games, and that could really come and haunt them, especially now in March. Now that we've gotten through all the various snubs, surprises, Cinderellas, and busts, it's time to get to the nitty-gritty, the tournament itself. How do you see the tournament playing out?
Well, as we take a look at the bracket here, me and you last night, we went over the bracket, did our votes, and went down. We've decided to go with the Final Four right here. And I have Louisville being the strongest team in the tournament. So I had them wiping clean their side, going straight to the Final Four. But when we talked about how we say Gonzaga is not a great team in this tournament, I actually have them losing to Kansas in the Sweet 16. because Kansas State is playing so well right now, and I think Gonzaga, as I said earlier, their record is very misleading. So I do not think they are actually going to be that strong. But New Mexico is the best team, in my opinion, going into this tournament. Louisville's the strongest team, but New Mexico's the best team. So I feel like they're going to get in. Miami's going to come in from the East Division, and VCU is going to be the Cinderella, but this time exceed farther than the Sweet 16 last year and get in the Final Four over there on the South Division.
Well, I agree with you with Louisville. Louisville, they come out of the Big East, and they won the conference tournament championship. And the past 4 years, the winner of the Big East championship has made it to at least the Elite Eight, and that includes UConn, who was national championship 2 seasons ago. When you're coming and winning the Big East championship, since it's a longer tournament, you come in a lot hotter. And I think that'll be to Louisville's advantage, especially this year. And they made it to the national championship last year, which also gives them a lot of experience. I agree with you with Miami coming out of the East. But in the South, I want to look at Florida. Florida, they've been really inconsistent. But when it comes to March, last year they made a run to the Elite Eight, which really shocked a lot of people. And I think this year they're going to take it a step further and make it to the Final Four. They're led by 4 really good players in Eric Murphy, Kenny Boynton, Mike Rosario, and Patrick Young. These are really good players who average 12 points a game, and they're coached by Billy Donovan, who has 2 national championships to his credit. This is a good team.
The one thing, though, with Florida is, as you said, they're so inconsistent. The one team who I feel is the most consistent in that section is VCU. And you can't tell me that a team who lost to Kentucky, keep in mind they were the national champions last year, but they didn't even make the tournament. Not even seemed to be close to making the tournament. And Florida got basically smacked around by Kentucky in that game. I don't see how Florida, with their young squad, I mean, they can go somewhere, maybe next year, but I don't see them going very far in this tournament with that team.
I think Florida, it's all up to whether or not they can play to their potential or not. If they play to their potential, they're a national championship caliber team. If not, there could be a quick upset early on.
That's a very good point. But then also let's look at Ohio State in your bracket. You got Ohio State there. I have New Mexico. We look at this. Ohio State has also played very inconsistent. Now, lucky for them, they've gotten hot towards the end of the year, so it's a good pick to pick in that West Division because you always want the hot hand going into the Final Four. But do you really think Ohio State can match up against the defensive toughness of New Mexico?
I think they're led by Deshaun Thomas, who averages 20 points a game. In my opinion, he's the best player in the Big Ten, and I think that'll be really helpful for them. They lost by 22 points to Wisconsin earlier this year, but since then they haven't lost. That's at least they've won 10 games, and they won the Big Ten championship. This is a really strong team, and they're coming in hot. That's going to be to their benefit, and that's why I think they can get over New Mexico and Wisconsin in the Elite Eight.
All right, last thing I want to look at actually is neither of us have Indiana getting in there. Yeah. Indiana was the team to come in and win the national championship this year. Why do you not have them in?
I have Miami. I think Miami, they won the ACC championship, and they felt that they should have been a 1 seed. And they kind of just got disrespected getting a 2 seed, especially behind Indiana, who didn't even win their conference championship. And I think when they meet up in the Elite Eight, that'll be the chip on their shoulder that pushes them over.
I think that's a great point, and you also got to point out the play of if Cody Zeller plays bad, Indiana plays bad.
That is all for our Clutch Time special March Madness edition. I'm Andy Martinez.
And I'm Jeremy Culver. Be sure to go on InSchoolSports.com to check out our full coverage as we will both name our national championships online and a little more in-depth analysis of the tournament. I'm Jeremy Culver for Clutch Time. Remember, you guys, in the end, it's not the skill, it's the clutch.